Hey everybody, it's Domi and Jamie back with part 2 of Great Depression Punched York, but Valencia Ballroom dancers swayed to swing bands.
If you missed part 1, please go back to Facebook. We just recorded the first segment, but now we're going to get started with the ballroom.
If the ballroom could talk. So the ballroom officially opened on December 5th in 1928, and Harvey Mansberger's orchestra was the very first performance. However, it wasn't an immediate success. So this new hot dig took some work to get the word out that extensive advertising campaigns were needed. And all the work led to results, thankfully. So by 1929, they booked national acts and they were drawing really large crowds. And some of the people were coming from 50 miles away to come dance at the Valencia and listen to these bands play.
And shout out to Tom Davidson. He has copies of the picture in the background that was an old postcard. And he kept some and gave them to us, which is like so cool.
That was so cool.
Like a token that someone else is like keeping history alive.
Mm-hmm.
So here is a picture of our spring leveraged wooden floors, and the springs below, there was this kind of misconception that they were, you can actually like feel them, like they were for the dancers, but Blake Gifford, the architect that helped us uncover a lot of the information, said, no, that is a myth. You actually can't feel it. It's really for the integrity of the floor below to re-adhere the structural integrity, so that when people were dancing, because when you think about the thousands and thousands of pounds, it wasn't going to then fall through from the movement.
It's a lot. Yeah, when we were doing this in person, we asked everybody to stand up and hop to see if
they
could
feel it. Some of them were like, yeah.
I think it's a psychological thing.
This was there were only 2 or 3 of these around the entire country. So it was still exceptional that we had it here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want you to imagine the room filled with hundreds of dancers listening to swing music, and they would have moved music like Benny Goodman's theme song released back in 1938. And when we were there at the Valencia in person, we had the Generations Big Band, and they played a song for us, Benny Goodman's theme song. They played it for us live in person. Unfortunately, we don't have them here in Jamie's kitchen. But if you want to go on YouTube and look up Benny Goodman's theme song and pretend like you're in 1939 and dance around your living room, please be our guest.
Otto and I started dancing. We'll start dancing to that.
Cutest little dance partner.
And all that dancing does make me hot. So the Tassie is actually installed an air conditioning. For many, this would have been the first time in New York County that you would have stepped off of the steaming hot sidewalks in the summer into a space that's cold.
It was a big deal.
Now, an anniversary book touts that this was the first air-conditioned ballroom in America. Probably not, because later we found a newspaper article that says it was one of 3. But it was the first on the East Coast.
Yes.
Yeah, east of Chicago, technically. The same system would have cooled the fruit and produce store next door.
And then we're moving into a music explosion. So during the Great Depression, music and dance enthusiasts drove as far as 200 miles to the Valencia. So that might not seem like a big deal today, but back then that was a really far way to go. And some of the attractions happening around the county during this time weren't just the Valencia, but York area's first radio station that went on air, Work Radio 1350. The York Symphony Orchestra performed for the first time. The York Little Theater opened, and then we had Crispus Attucks in 1931. So there was a lot happening in York County.
And during the Great Depression, which is one of our takeaways, that we were creating and innovating during the Great Depression. So the Valencia was not the only space for dancing. People could also go south to Cobblestones or the old Alcazar Ballroom back then, as well as the Yorktown. Here's a picture of the Yorktown from the 1970s. It would be great if you were there either at the Valencia or at the Yorktown. If you could comment below and just be like, yep, I was there. Even some pictures would be super cool.
Pictures would be amazing. I love looking at the outfits. You know, people really dressed up to go out back then.
And they're like hair. I'm not surprised you like that. You like dressing up. Is that where you get probably, because you have like 11 outfits now?
Oh, I have way more than that.
You're like a girl. No.
Don't give away all my secrets.
So if you haven't seen, go on Domi's Facebook page, Preserving the History of Newburytown. She's always reenacting and dressing up, and it's just beautiful. And it's very classic, and I love seeing your pictures.
Yeah, I do like to go swing dancing. So
one of these times I'm going to go. I'm really not a good dancer.
Go up to the green door in Carlisle. They teach you.
Okay, all right. Yeah. Maybe dance off his dusting shoes.
We'll have a whole history night at swing dancing.
That'd be fun.
So in the middle of the Great Depression, attendance was so high in the ballroom that they had to expand it. So that's always a good problem to have. Yeah. And they dressed the outside with a new facade. So, things were changing for the better. And the architect's name was Edward Lieber, and he apprenticed with J.A. Dempworth, and he also designed the Royal Firehouse, which is now the York County Fire Museum.
Once you begin to see like a Dempworth building, like you can start to see like it has a very similar pattern. Yeah. This is also the time during the 1930s renovations that they installed 14 new Spanish murals and the Spanish motif. They hired a guy out of New York, a New York City commission to come down and do this, which is fantastic. This picture is the most recent picture that we have. This was in 1988. They are not there today. Sadly, our guess is it probably wasn't maintained when they came in after the Kinsleys purchased it in 1990. I can imagine that they were very expensive.
Yeah.
But the pictures that we've seen that still had these murals and the Spanish motif are, I mean, just breathtaking. And I wish I could have seen them in person.
I know. It would have been really cool to be there giving our presentation to be able to see these murals in person.
Yeah.
So in the 1930s, the Valencia saw huge renovations, and they added a second floor known as the Blue Room, and it was meant to be a separate space for additional functions, and we'll get into that near the end of our talk. And they also ended up digging out the basement. They removed the load-bearing brick walls, and they replaced them with steel columns.
Lots of work during that time period.
Lots.
So those brick walls that started as the three buildings that we mentioned in part one, they now merged into one space. The Rainbow Grill that we'll talk about later, that was dug out in the basement. There really were no, though, major changes after the 1930s except adding on an additional bar. So when you come to this space, like we said, it is like you're jumping back in time. This picture I took when we went and did our tour, and I made the audience guess where it was from, but it was up in one of the balconies. So we got to go explore, go up like this really kind of like shady ladder to go up to the top. There's lots of cobwebs. It was more used for like the mechanical necessities of the theater, like to operate it. There's really no space up there. One of the audience members asked if they could explain like the history of this, of like why they were there and what function they served, and we don't know the answer to that. So it'd be really cool if maybe there are some theater history experts or again more architects that could tell us the intention behind something like this.
So tens of hundreds of thousands of people, or tens if not hundreds of thousands, I'm not trying to lie about the numbers here, danced on the dance floor, but they also dined there too. So we actually have a look at a menu from 1933 that we found at the History Center.
93.
1993.
Which someone made fun of me because they're like, that's not history. Like
1993 is history. That's the year before I was born. That was 31, 32 years ago. Yeah. So the first course listed is a salad, and you have a choice between house salad, spinach, or Caesar salad. And then they have entrees, which are chicken Wellington, supreme chicken Kiev, filet of salmon, or chicken Valencia. And that was a boneless breast of chicken stuffed with homemade cornbread stuffing, served with pan gravy.
That'd be fun to try.
It would. I'd like to go back in time and taste some of the food that they had.
They also had pasta entries. You can see they're on that list. I probably would have chosen stuffed shells, frankly, because I love them, but they take forever to make. So when I go out, I like to buy things I don't like to make at home.
That's smart. That's smart.
Same with vegetables. They had delicious sounding things like whole baby dill carrots. Yes, please sign me up for that. We can't forget desserts. They had a chocolate mud cake, baklava, or lemon pound cake. I probably would have gone with the baklava.
They all sound good.
You did all
honestly.
of them?
Yeah, give me one of each. Please.
Our table would have gotten, one of each, then tried and like sampled.
Buffet style.
Yep, I love doing that.
So they also sold bulk hors d'oeuvres. So they had baked brie with brown sugar and almonds, and that was 2.2 pounds for a whopping $74. Fresh mushroom cap stuffed with crab deluxe, 50 of them for $58, and then pineapple wrapped in bacon, 30 for $30. Yep.
They also had clams casino, 50 for $62, and then melon wrapped in prosciutto. I'm like dying to try this. I feel like I need to pull it back.
I got a lot of reactions when we did our in-person presentation. A lot of people were like, I don't know if I want that or not.
It's where, I mean, you can't tell me. I feel like if you're at this caliber of a restaurant, like you're not going to make something that doesn't taste good.
It's just not something that you're going to find on your average York County menu.
Right.
So finally, if the walls really could talk, they would share interesting groups that had banquets there. So there was broken attendance records when Kay Kaiser's orchestra performed at the Valencia on March 3rd, 1939. The Knights Templar State Convention dance was held there. York Ice Machinery Exposition was there. The Lion State Convention banquet and dance. And then the Policeman's Ball was also held at the Valencia.
A lot of fun things.
Yeah.
To be, again, those walls could talk.
I know. And, they packed the house.
Here is another individual, Duke Ellington, who would have visited, and again, the Generations Big Band performed for us. They played Take the A Train, and we encourage you to go and listen to some of their stuff online.
So here in York County, we built a cultural community during the worst economic downturn in history. And a lot of times we turn to the arts when things get really tough. So I know you come from a family of artists.
Yeah, my grandma does. I can't say that when, that skill, I've said this, got diluted. I am not, unfortunately, an artist. My art comes in crafting slides for history. History
this
slides.
Is art. Well, maybe Otto will be the artist in the family, take up that mantle from Mom. Yeah.
I would love that. That'd be very
really cool.
So moving on to then the stage, if the stage could talk. So big names still come to York County. They come to the York Fair or the Appel Center. I know me and my friends, we always go to the York Fair every summer and see people like Foreigner or Hailstorm. But back then, this was the stage. This in the Yorktown Hotel was the downtown place to be. A lot of us stream our music on, I use Spotify. Yeah, Spotify or even YouTube or whatever when I'm home. But back in the day, in the 1920s and 30s, it's streaming. To all you young ones out there, streaming didn't exist. The radio was invented, you would have had a phonograph, or you would have gone to hear it live.
Yep, you had to be there in person.
So much more live music. It's interesting, too, because the Tassia family actually operated a radio show, a station, that was on the 100th block of North George Street.
They were smart. They had hands and all kinds
right?
of
Yeah, very
music.
clever.
Yeah, so the newly renovated Valencia paired with York's proximity to major cities, meaning that they could attract really big names in the 1930s through the 1960s. And it was also a place that people wanted to be. They wanted to be in York City. So we have a picture for you of the Valencia's trolley party in 1939, recognizing the closing of the trolley era. So that was a big deal. And our walkable sidewalks, our restaurants, we have comfortable hotels, and our safe streets made us the place to be in this time period. And today there's a revival of the downtown thanks to organizations like YCEA, who renovated the Yorktown, the Rockfish Hospitality Group that manages the Valencia. We also have the Appel Center and places like the York History Center. And they're really coming back and making the city, golden years again.
Whoop, whoop. I love going downtown for fun things and fun things to do. This would have been another one of the songs that people would have listened to. So let's dive into a little bit of the history of Benny Goodman. So earlier, again, we heard the Generations Big Band. They would have played songs like his theme song. Goodman helped usher in the 1930s swing era with songs like Let's Dance, Don't Be That Way, Avalon, or The King of Swing. He left school at the age of 14 to join the American Federation of Musicians, and he never looked back because he was able to perform at amazing venues like Carnegie Hall, and it was the first jazz band to do so, which earned him the title The King of Swing.
It worked for him, but don't try that at home.
Yeah. Backup plan.
And then we have Frank Sinatra, and he was one of the most popular entertainers of the age, and he stood right on the stage at the Valencia where Jamie and I stood in person.
That's so fun.
I know. And he wasn't just an award-winning singer. He rose to higher fame by acting in films like From Here to Eternity. But he got his start by singing big band numbers, and he left behind a massive repertoire of songs that include iconic tunes like New York, New York, and Strangers of the Night.
Of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Glenn Miller. I was actually surprised when I looked at those dates. He was pretty young when he passed,
he was,
right?
Very young.
Yep. So he was a big band conductor. He also composed a lot of his own music, and he played the trombone. He's considered the music symbol of the World War II generations. He stunned the world by disbanding his orchestra and enlisting in the army in I have to double check on that year. I think it was 42, but I double check on that. He's persuaded the military to take him in and accept him because he said that he would put a little more spring in the feet of our marching men.
I love it.
Kind of fun. He ended up raising millions of dollars for the war effort and led an all-star Army Air Force band for 2 years. And they would have heard songs like that.
Yeah. So we would have heard Moonlight Serenade from 1939. And again, if you were there in person, the big band played for us, but unfortunately we don't have them here tonight. So look it up on YouTube.
So Cab Calloway, he would have been welcomed, but only to entertain. He was a band leader, singer, well-known entertainer for his big band swing era performances. He briefly stayed in law school before he left to start singing at nightclubs. The stage would have seen people like Cab Calloway and the other two guys there on your screen. These pictures were taken, by the way, from that 1939 Valencia anniversary book. But these black musicians would not have been allowed in the audience. In fact, we could not find a single picture of a black person in the audience or dancing. And if there were mixed audiences, the walls haven't talked about it.
Right.
We don't know if there were all African-American dancers or not. We doubt it because there's no evidence, but there could have been.
So even though our position north of the Mason-Dixon line, it didn't mean that we are exempt from racism, unfortunately. So black musicians were not permitted to stay at the many hotels, including the Yorktown in New York City at the time anyways. So later we had the Green Book, and that listed the Yorktown as a safe place to stay in the 1950s and 1960s. When the 350th Field Army Black Devil Band played at another York theater in 1919, Dr. George Bowles and other black leaders found rooms for them with families in New York City. So they weren't allowed to stay in the hotels or, the actual establishments. They had to find lodging with families that allowed them to stay there.
Extra work on top of everything. There were even cases where black band members were denied meals. So this happened when Gene Krupa's band, they came to play to Valencia. They went to a nearby restaurant to grab some grub. And this was in 1941, by the way. They were denied service, and Krumpa protested forcefully to the point that police were called. He did post bail, and then he hightailed it out of there very quick over to Schuylkill County.
Even though we don't know if the Valencia allowed mixed audiences until much later, there were other places in York County that welcomed the traveling and touring performances. So in 1941, Marian Anderson and Roland Hayes, which were two black artists at the time, performed at William Penn High School, where they were greeted with thunderous applause.
Sidney Poitier would have came to Valencia, obviously, as well. He came later when he visited in 2002, which is pretty cool. He was a director. He was a producer. He broke the color barrier in film industry, becoming the first African-American to win the Academy Award. He actually won Best Actor for his role in Lilies of the Field. This black movie star visited Valencia because he was invited as a guest speaker of the Junior League of York in the Spotlight Speaker Series.
And one of our final famous performers that came was the Clooney sisters and Rosemary Clooney, who is a favorite of mine and of Jamie's.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, we love her. So in 1947, she sang the Vaughn Monroe Orchestra in a Camel Cigarette sponsored commercial radio show. So, back then that was the thing, though. I mean, cigarettes were a huge deal. So Maria Curie, an outstanding local dancer, remembers her wearing a knee-length chiffon flowing dress for the performance.
So fun. I personally was so excited when I found out that Rosemary Clooney was here because I love White Christmas. It is one of my favorite Christmas movies, and I always watched Rosemary Clooney, and then from this research, I was like, holy smokes, she was in York County.
I know.
On this stage. York County is a cool place.
Now we need George Clooney to show up.
It's not too late, George. Come to York. So thank you for watching. This is part 2. We are going to start part 3, the last segment of today's episode on the Valencia.